Well, let me say, if Daniel was a TV box set or a Netflix series, as the credits rolled on chapter 2, it all was good, wasn't it? I mean, after his statue nightmare, Nebuchadnezzar, he falls on his face, he pays homage. And let's look at the words that he actually said at that point. What did he actually say at the end of chapter 2? Look at these words. Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings. Brilliant. Isn't that it? The emotional roller coaster is over. That's it then, isn't it? He's got it, surely. If it was a TV series, you'd be wondering, well, why are we only in season 1, program 2 of 6? And then there's another season with another 6 programs, very different from the first 6. It seems all sorted, doesn't it? Why do we need any more? Nebuchadnezzar's got it. In this battle of 2 cities, 2 kingdoms, he's recognized God's kingdom is the winner. God's the eternal one, not his. The statue got smashed up, replaced by God's rock, the mountain. Jesus, the king of the eternal kingdom, not Nebuchadnezzar. So, we've started program 3. How's that going? How's Nebuchadnezzar's realization holding up? Well, Joe is going to read for us the first 12 verses. So let's see how things are going.
Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up."
Thank you very much, Joe. That's great. Well, I wonder what you make of all of that. It's a bit of a shocker of an opening scene, isn't it? Starting to see why we need 2 seasons of 6 programs. Seems it's not quite all nailed down when it comes to Nebuchadnezzar, is it? I mean, can you believe this guy? He's been dreaming of power embodied in a scary statue. He's been told, well, it's all pathetic compared to God's power. So what does he do? He thinks to himself, well, I'll have me a bit of that. I'll build myself that statue, only better. So imagine him on the phone to the architect. I want 30 meters of shimmering gold, not just the head like the dream. No. I want the whole lot in gold. No silver or iron, the whole lot. You hear me? All gold. Well, no one entering Babylon would miss this. Nelson's column is slightly taller, but that is mostly plinth. Nelson's got nothing on this guy. What's he up to? What's he doing? This is a bold architectural wonder, isn't it? It's only actually 2.5 meters wide. So it's a feat of engineering just to get it to stay up, this needle-like image of glimmering gold. Now, it's not unusual, is it? Architecture is often used to make our mark on the world. We still do it today. So, for example, buildings like these, the Burj Al Arab Hotel in Dubai, made to look like a sail. It's an incredible feat of engineering because it's built on sand and doesn't fall over. And then, of course, you've got the Shard in London. We like to make our mark with something impressive. Well, maybe, but given what happens next, it's worse, isn't it? What's it represent? Is it a god of some form, or maybe even Nebuchadnezzar himself? Chapter 2, it was all just international politics, dreams, ambitions of the powerful. Chapter 3, we get a statue. And that is more of a concern because of what Nebuchadnezzar wants people to do about it. You can't have missed it as Joe read it. He wants them to worship it. Now, this is new territory, isn't it? He's mixing things up, political and religious allegiances. Now, we might have thought that we're home and dry at the end of chapter 2, but no, there's a second wave in chapter 3. The focus in chapter 3 shifts. It seems to be loyalties that are in view. The focus lands on how a situation of extreme danger is going to affect personal loyalties. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we'll call them Shad, Mesh, and Abed for short. They'd done well, hadn't they, with the popularity test of chapter 1. And then we meet them again in chapter 3. And now they're facing a challenge to religious loyalties, not political. Who's worthy of loyalty? This linking of political and religious allegiance, a challenge to every aspect of the faith and the lifestyle of these 3 young Jews. And the statue, of course, intended to impress and intimidate. There's a roll call of A-listers on the guest list. Everyone who was anyone was there. Then there's the music. It says every kind of music. So think Glastonbury meets Cheltenham meets the Proms, rock, pop, house, techno, classical. Try and picture how intimidating this scene would be if amidst all that pomp, ceremony, displays of human power and achievement, you are going to be the one that's not going to pay homage. You're not going to bow down to it amidst all of that. Can you imagine the pressure to conform? The pressure of expectation. Can you imagine how hard it would be to refuse? See, ponder this situation for a minute or two, and there's a contemporary ring, isn't there? I mean, it's unlikely as a Christian you'll be asked to bow down to a statue of Bojo. But our cultural gods today are by and large ideologies, aren't they? Today, you and I face expectation to pay homage to the latest don't question it ideology that our Western culture or media, social media gets behind. Think for a moment, perhaps, of what happened even earlier this year. Let me share my screen again and show you a picture. Do you remember Vunipola refused to take the knee in support of Black Lives Matter before a Saracens match? There he is, right second from the left, still standing. Now, of course, he's not racist, but as a Christian, he can't support an organisation that demands almost worship, that burns down churches and sets fire to Bibles. Well, I think our narrator is actually poking fun at Nebuchadnezzar's overreaching ambitions. The repetition of that A-list, the guest list, did you notice it? Verse 2 and 3. I could almost hear it in Jo's voice as she read it. Have I got to read that great list of names all over again? Why not just put they in verse 3? Because the more you labour it, the more it sounds laughable. And then there's the play on words too. If you're keen, Nebuchadnezzar asks for worship to the statue that he's set up. Look back in chapter 2, Daniel used the same words of God. He's the one who does the setting up in chapter 2, the setting up of kings. See, the narrator is making clear what's going on. The word worship is repeated 11 times. He's pointing the reader to how ridiculous this all is. He's pointing to the heart of the problem. Do you see, from the Tower of Babel to statues on the plains of Dura, to our belief that we can control everything, that science has got it covered. I heard this week one person describing on the news the vaccine as salvation in a vial. Can you believe it? Humankind consistently tries to rise to the level of a god. I quite love Isaiah's comment on this kind of thing. Let me read to you a little bit from Isaiah. It's absolutely brilliant. To whom then will you compare God? What image will you compare him to? Now listen to the sarcasm. As for an idol, a craftsman casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A man too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. Gods that will not rot, you've got to make sure they don't rot. You need to put some special preservative on them. And then he looks for a skilled craftsman to set up an idol that will not topple. What sort of a God is that it has to make sure it won't topple over? See, there's the reality check from Isaiah. Nebuchadnezzar's amazing statue is actually going to need some skilled engineers to make sure it just doesn't topple over. Isn't there something ridiculous at the thought of the great and the good, those A-listers falling on their faces before a lifeless statue at the sound of a musical medley? We'll keep that in mind as the episode unfolds and we see what God can do. Well, the scene ends on a cliffhanger. We don't know what motivated the astrologers to snitch on Shed, Mesh and Abed, but the narrator gives us some hints. Maybe it was racial. They keep repeating the repetition of Jews. Why have people from a conquered nation got the top jobs whilst they've been passed over? You can almost feel the chip on their shoulder when they come pretty close to criticizing the king's choices, when they say, those Jews you set up over the affairs of Babylon. Well, let's go back to the text and Jo, and she's going to read for us verses 13 to 23.
Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace.
Thanks very much, Jo. So once again, Nebuchadnezzar's lost it. Did you notice? His anger management course hasn't covered handling his rage when it's his prestige or his status that gets disrespected. Either they worship his statue or they get roasted. Their choice. Got to love how this event is narrated. In the midst of his little speech, his warning to them, he asks the most pertinent question. Here's, in fact, the key question for this whole sorry episode. He asked this: what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Verse 15, what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Well, Nebuchadnezzar, that question's going to come back to bite you. You'll be finding out soon enough. How ridiculous he thinks his super hot furnace, an enormous statue, is power. Well, the three men respond. They use his first name. They don't call him king. We don't need to defend ourselves. That's not rudeness. Instead, it's an appeal that he realize he might think he's all powerful, exalted, power over life and death, but he's still just a man. And friends, this reply, don't miss this. It is one of the finest expressions of daring faith. In a sense, it's the hallmark of Daniel. Let's look at what they actually say to him. Even if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. You see, they appeal to a realm where Nebuchadnezzar has no power. They don't pretend to understand or know what's going to happen. They believe God can rescue them from the flames. He is able, but they don't presume he will necessarily rescue them. Sure, that he will rescue them from under the king's hand, but that is different from being rescued from the flames. They know there is a bigger picture. There's something much greater at stake here than their immediate danger. We will not serve your gods or worship the golden image you have set up. We're not doing it, Nebuchadnezzar. We'll face your furnace before we turn our back on our God. And in the midst of all that pressure to conform, plus the gruesome prospect of roasting alive, they know who actually holds all the cards. They know where their loyalty belongs, the real kingdom. And it's not Nebuchadnezzar's. Now, try and feel the narrative here. Put yourself in their sandals for a moment. In the midst of what looks like total power over them in a human sense, when every element of the world around them is screaming at them, here's power, let it go, your God. Just fairy tale stuff, nice stories for the nursery, but here's reality. The might of the world's superpower, the assembled good and great. Do you really want to run up against us? Really? Do you seriously think your little gatherings, your little church, your little sermons, your little songs are anything compared to all of this? There is a form that worries me. It has a very victorious ring to its message all the time. Overextends the reality that bind to God's kingdom to mean that the here and now we won't know suffering. Things won't go wrong, that we're somehow victorious, that we will be healed or whatever it is. But it means we're strong in a worldly sense. It's not true. It's not the promise of Scripture. It's not the mistake Shad, Mesh and Abed make. He is able, but they don't presume he will necessarily rescue them. The promise that God will put out their flames, or yours or mine. I wonder if you know famously the situation for some famous Christians from the past, Latimer, Ridley and Cranmer. Pretty much responsible, in fact, for the inception of the Church of England, the beliefs, the basis, the prayer book, the doctrine, the 39 articles. Much of what you experience from All Saints Loose is in their hands, really. Well, they were all three burnt at the stake, two of them together, Latimer and Ridley, and a little while later Cranmer. And they were burnt at the stake for being faithful to Scripture. God did not put their flames out because there was a bigger thing in view. Their victory of faith overcame the world. And this is what Ridley, what Latimer said to Ridley. Play the man, Ridley. And by God's grace, we will light this day in England a candle that will never be put out. He was right, wasn't he? Because here we are, friends, here today. We're not left in any doubt about how hot this furnace was. Even the guards that put them in were killed as they did so. Surely the king's absolute power of life and death is vindicated, isn't it? Surely the sorry tale ends there. Well, Joe's going to read our final scene for us.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Well, it's not over. It's not all over. Nebuchadnezzar's anger giving way to panic. Now, I doubt he's struggling with the maths. This is no dream this time. This was no nightmare. Far worse. Seems their God had taken up his challenge. What God will be able to rescue you from my hand? No musical fanfare. No line of dignitaries. None of Nebuchadnezzar's trappings of power. Their God quietly appears in the flames beside his people. It's a decisive answer, isn't it, to Nebuchadnezzar's question. What God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Well, he has his answer. The matter is settled, not a hair singed. And here, from the lips of the king himself, just as in chapter 2, let's see what he concludes as a result. Praise be to the God of Shadrach and Abed. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. No other God can save in this way. Let's just be clear, that is Nebuchadnezzar himself saying that. So it means, doesn't it, that we know certain things so far from this story. We know, for example, chapter 1, that the Lord reigns. We know, chapter 2, he's building his kingdom. And chapter 3, he's calling his people to live in the light of that. Now, friends, it'd be very easy for us to look on this story and be among those shaking our heads at Nebuchadnezzar, pointing the finger, identifying with the 3 courageous young men. Well done, guys, resisting the call to worship anything other than God. But I wonder if rather than skipping over Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to just pause. What is going on in his heart? What is driving him? Why the statue? Isn't his heart craving status? Isn't it the search for significance that drives him? Isn't the A-list guest list about recognition? Isn't it himself that he's promoting? Now, we might be a little more subtle than a 30-meter golden statue of ourselves, but we do find other ways, don't we? One writer has put it really quite bluntly, and let me share what he said on this. I seem to have trouble with my mouse at the moment. It's not moving for some reason. Let's just see if I can get it to... There we go. Yet, if we are honest, we all should primarily identify with the condition of the king. For as with him, the architecture of our own soul rises to the heavens in self-adulation. And if given our way, we too are tempted to call upon everyone within earshot to pay respects to our deeds. Simply put, we all set up idols for the purpose of worship. Worth pausing, isn't it, on Nebuchadnezzar before we write ourselves too quickly into the story as the three fiery followers. But even as we do move to them, there is a danger here that we jump too quickly from the fiery followers to ourselves. So it becomes a kind of don't be like them, him, Nebuchadnezzar, be like them. It becomes legalism. Now, when you're reading your Old Testament, there is a danger that we read the situation for them then. I'm going to share my screen again. So if you like, we have the characters in the narrative at the time. What is happening to them? How is God dealing with them? And so on. And we move directly to us now. So as one example, we see God punishing his people for faithlessness with an invasion or the loss of a battle or whatever in the Old Testament. And we read in a pandemic or some negative event in the life of our nation, and we conclude God must be punishing us now as he did them then. Now, he might be disciplining, but that is a different thing. You see, we're missing something very significant when we do that. We're missing the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the fulfillment of Old Testament promise. So as we seek to understand our Old Testament, we have to go via Jesus Christ. So as we reflect, we have them then, and we might ask, well, what does this mean for them then? What's the significance of events? What's God teaching them about God in this? But again, before we dive straight to us, we need to ask, well, what difference the cross of Jesus Christ? We have to go via Jesus to get to us now. We have to go via Jesus. So in this instance, looking at our three men in the fiery furnace, how does that point us to Christ? Or what difference does he make? You see, the fiery followers' resolve not to follow other gods is actually the same language that we see Jesus using with the devil in Matthew 4. Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Now, for our three young men, it took them to a place of death. Jesus served his God. He never wavered. The three men, though they passed that test, would not be able to make that claim that they were always faithful. Jesus' unwavering resolve to serve God took him also to death, but not a death he deserved. Instead, to our place of death, where he took our death for us. So why am I going on about this? So you see, when we fail to be faithful, when we fail to be like these three fiery followers, which you will be, which I will be, going via Jesus, we can claim forgiveness on the grounds of his faithful, sin-bearing death. You see, if we go via Jesus, we get it right. If you go direct along the bottom, you'll end up with legalism. If you go via Jesus, there's no legalism but grace, response to God's love in Christ. Go straight along the bottom of our square and it leads us only to condemnation, to guilt. Go via Christ and it's a response to grace. So I doubt that you'll be forced to bow to a golden statue. And it'd be easy to highlight the obvious material gods of our age or the usual idols set up for us to worship. But if you decide not to chase after money or career or those obvious ones, doubtful it will really cause a stir. Doubtful anyone will care if you don't bow down to those. But there are gods of this age which refusal to bow down to will heat up a furnace. It'll be more subtle ones, more subtle, but the rage that will be induced if you refuse to worship them, much more akin to that of Nebuchadnezzar's. Our golden statues today are largely ideologies, aren't they? Worldviews that you're expected to sign up to, the kind of things summarized in the so-called British values, anything that would fit with the constantly changing issues that exercise the woke generation. I mentioned one from earlier last year, the sports team's expectation to bow the knee for Black Lives Matter, expectation to bow down to that ideology. Seems sometimes these gods clash with inconsistency. So at the risk of being accused of being facetious, given we're supposed to use the phrase people of colour, the god of political correctness will very quickly vilify any public figure who fails to use that phrase. Why isn't it people of colour's lives matter? It's a genuine question. Why is it okay to say black then? What do you do when working for a government organisation when it requires you to serve ideology that clashes with God's ethics? The NHS staff expected to swap their plain lanyard ribbon for a rainbow one. Or adoption agency staff facing disciplinary action if they won't embrace same-sex parents. The school teacher required to teach things that they believe are harmful, hurtful and wrong, but aligned to new ideologies. A former Bible college friend of ours is vilified for objecting to the Mermaids organisation training in his Church of England primary school. Ideologies are the gods we're supposed to and expected to serve today. They're the ones that if we will stand and refuse to worship, will bring us the most pain, the most suffering. Which brings me to the thing that most exercises me about chapter 3. You see, it's not the statue. I'm not exercised by the pressure to conform. In a sense, I quite like a fight. I'm not exercised by the statue. I'm not exercised by resisting pressure to bow down to false gods. In other words, I don't have a problem with the call to daring and robust faith. What exercises me most is that it is a call to daring and robust faith with no guarantee that God will intervene in the here and now. Verse 18, but even if he does not, we want you to know, O King, that we will not serve your gods. The rescue is certain, but we're not guaranteed we won't suffer now. What we're going to do now is just take a few minutes to pray quietly, perhaps our own circumstances. What gods are you being expected to serve? Maybe in your workplace, in contexts where you meet up, perhaps at the school, what's expected of you, sometimes on social media. And as you think and pray, just ask the question, how will Daniel 3, what we've looked at today, change, be different tomorrow? How will you reply to that Facebook post to join some campaign for something that actually, when you think about it, you shouldn't be part of, and for which failure to sign up to will cause pain? Or that work money raising thing that's going around that you think isn't right, the requirement to do something that you know would be to serve the wrong God. Have a think for a moment, whatever the circumstances are, and ponder how Daniel 3 will change that. And then I'll pray for us in a moment or two.